The night was unnervingly quiet in Ouagadougou, a silence so deep it felt almost unnatural. It was as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The air, heavy with the weight of the unknown, pressed down on the streets below. The distant hum of crickets punctuated the stillness, their rhythm oddly loud in the quiet night. A dry wind swept across the city, carrying the faint scent of dust and wilting acacia blossoms, fragrant, yet tinged with the bitterness of unease. The once fresh breeze now felt foreign, as though it too were whispering secrets of something hidden in the shadows. President Ibrahim Traoré stood motionless at the grand window of the Kosiam Palace, his sharp eyes scanning the sleeping city beneath him. The buildings, the streets, the marketplace that had once been alive with activity, now all seemed muted, blanketed in a veil of calm that belied the turmoil simmering just below the surface. His senses, honed by years of military service, were on edge. The faintest sounds, the subtlest shift in the atmosphere, felt amplified in this stillness, and something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air that didn't belong, something Ibrahim couldn't shake off. The wind howled again, carrying with it whispers of dust. Dust from the parched earth that surrounded the city, dust from the battles fought and victories won, but also dust from secrets long buried, waiting to be uncovered. Ibrahim's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, unsettling premonition. For weeks now, the calm had been fractured by troubling events, small at first, almost imperceptible, but steadily growing in magnitude. Military plans, once sacred, had been leaking to the outside world. Confidential meetings meant to secure the future of the country had been compromised. Every move he made seemed to be anticipated by unseen forces. It was as though someone was always one step ahead. And the more Ibrahim thought about it, the clearer it became. Someone within his own inner circle was betraying him. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Ibrahim had led Burkina Faso to break free from the choking grip of foreign influence. He had been the one to expel the foreign troops, reclaim the country's resources, and restore its pride. It had been a hard-fought battle, one filled with resistance from the old powers that had long viewed Burkina Faso as little more than a pawn in their geopolitical games. But Ibrahim had been steadfast. He had fought for his people's sovereignty, for their right to control their own land, their own destiny. Yet, as he stood in the quiet of the palace, he understood that this victory had come at a price. The nations he had defied were not the type to let go of their influence so easily. If they could no longer control Burkina Faso through military power, they would find another way, more subtle, more insidious. They would infiltrate, they would manipulate, and they would exploit weaknesses from within. Ibrahim's eyes narrowed as he looked down at the city. He had known this would come, had known that the battle for independence would never truly be over. The enemies he had faced before had been open about their intentions, their actions brazen and clear. But this, the betrayal he felt creeping into the heart of his government, was different. It was personal. Someone who had once stood by his side, someone he had trusted with his life, was now working against him. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. But Ibrahim was no stranger to hardship. He had faced battles before, both on the battlefield and in the halls of power. This would be no different. The wind outside grew colder, as though the very air itself was mirroring the turmoil within him. Yet, in the midst of this unease, Ibrahim's mind was already shifting gears. The knowledge of betrayal stung, but it also sharpened his focus. This was not just about protecting the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. It was about protecting everything he had built, everything his people had fought for. And if it meant confronting the enemy within, he would do so without hesitation. Ibrahim's grip on the windowsill tightened, his eyes still fixed on the city. In the darkness below, He could hear the faint sound of footsteps on the streets, the occasional rumble of a vehicle passing by. Life continued, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows. But Ibrahim knew better. He knew that the storm was already here, and it was time to face it head-on. One evening, deep into the stillness of the night, a young and diligent soldier, Captain Naba Zongo, sat hunched over the radio equipment in a small makeshift monitoring station. His eyes, sharp from years of training, scanned the static-ridden signals, the soft hum of the equipment in the background, like a lullaby. He had been tracking transmissions from the Northern Territories for hours, when a peculiar signal, faint and distorted, caught his attention. He adjusted the dials, ears straining to catch the irregular frequency. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a muddled broadcast, a weather report, or perhaps some idle chatter between farmers. But then, a word here, a phrase there, stuck out. Zongo leaned in closer, a knot forming in his stomach. Hidden amidst what seemed like an innocuous agricultural update, there was a secret message, something far more sinister. The transmission contained maps, names, and precise details, all of which only the president's inner circle would have had access to. His heart raced as he flipped through the documents attached to the transmission. The chilling realization dawned on him. This was no accident. Someone inside the government was leaking information, betraying Ibrahim's trust. With a swift urgency, Zongo gathered the evidence and without hesitation rushed to Kosiam Palace. The weight of the moment pressed on him as the sounds of the night seemed to grow louder, the wind howling through the trees outside as though nature itself was urging him to act quickly. His steps echoed in the empty corridors of the palace as he made his way to the conference room where Ibrahim awaited. By midnight, a secret meeting convened in the dimly lit conference room of Kosiam Palace. The faint flicker of an old chandelier above cast long, haunting shadows across the walls, as if the very structure of the room were holding its breath. The air felt thick, heavy with a sense of dread that hung like a storm cloud ready to burst. The only sound, aside from the occasional shuffling of feet, was the soft rustle of papers as Zongo stepped forward and placed the intercepted documents on the polished mahogany table. The flickering light illuminated the fear in his eyes, his brow furrowed with both concern and determination. President Ibrahim Traoré, his face etched with years of leadership and battle-worn experience, was the first to break the silence. His piercing gaze shifted to the documents before him. His hands, usually steady, trembled ever so slightly as he picked them up. As he began to read, his expression remained unreadable, but the tension in his eyes betrayed him. Each detail revealed was like a dagger twisting deeper into the heart of his trust. His closest advisors, seasoned men who had stood by his side through thick and thin, leaned forward in anticipation. Their faces hardened, their brows furrowing as they absorbed the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding before them. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing moment, as the atmosphere turned thick with disbelief. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and profound, amplifying the faint hum of the night beyond the palace walls. A deep sense of foreboding settled over the gathering, as the name of the suspected traitor was spoken aloud. Colonel Désiré Ouattara. Ibrahim's chest tightened at the sound of Ouattara's name. It was a name he had trusted, a man who had fought alongside him in the trenches, a brother in arms. Ouattara had been more than just a colleague. He had been a confidant, someone Ibrahim had relied on in the nation's darkest hours. To hear his name now associated with treachery felt like a blow to the gut. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had endured on the battlefield. His voice broke the heavy silence, low and steady, though his words carried the weight of 1,000 emotions. "We wait," Ibrahim declared, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "If there is a snake among us, We follow it to its nest before striking." The room was deathly quiet as Ibrahim's words lingered in the air. His mind was already calculating the next steps, weighing the cost of every decision. He knew the gravity of the situation. The enemy was not just at the gates, it was inside, hidden among those he trusted most. But Ibrahim, ever the strategist, understood that impatience would only lead to mistakes. The time for rash decisions had passed. Now was the time for careful, deliberate action. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, the kind that hangs between the calm before the storm and the storm itself. As his advisors exchanged glances, Ibrahim's mind was already at work, piecing together a plan. The hunt for the traitor had begun, but for now, patience would be his greatest weapon. The days that followed were marked by a quiet intensity, as Ibrahim's team went to work, operating under the cloak of secrecy. Every move, every decision was calculated. Captain Zongo and his trusted soldiers, all hand-picked for their loyalty and skill, took to the shadows, watching Colonel Wata with the keen eyes of predators. They trailed him through the city's winding streets, a silent presence, invisible yet ever watchful. Wata, seemingly unaware, continued his routine, his movements predictable, but there was something different now, a change in the air. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, every time he paused in conversation, Ibrahim's team was there, lurking just out of sight, waiting. Zongo's soldiers knew the stakes. If Wata was the traitor, he had to be caught in the act. There could be no room for error. The operation was delicate, like walking a razor's edge. Surveillance was the key, but not just any surveillance. This had to be precise, meticulous. Zongo's team tapped Wata's communications, intercepting every message, every phone call. They followed him wherever he went, watching him closely as he slipped away under the cover of night. One evening, Zongo's men, positioned near the French embassy, caught Wata entering a nondescript building. A building that had never shown up on any of their intelligence reports before. Its anonymity was a red flag. The soldiers planted hidden cameras across the street, their lenses trained on the building's entrance, the kind of covert setup that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. Hours passed in tense silence. The wind howled through the narrow streets, but inside their hidden post, the team was focused. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the door of the building creaked open, and Wata emerged. He wasn't alone. With him were two men, foreign in appearance, their faces obscured by shadows. The air in the surveillance room grew thick with anticipation as Zongo's team watched through the hidden cameras. Ibrahim, back at the palace, observed through a live feed, his gaze hardening with each passing second. Wata greeted the men with an almost jovial smile, his body language far too comfortable for a man under suspicion. Zongo leaned in closer to the screen, his finger hovering over the playback controls. The footage was grainy, but enough to reveal the chilling truth. Wata was handing over sensitive files, documents containing national security secrets, military plans, and diplomatic strategies. The men took the documents eagerly, their eyes glinting with an unspoken understanding. In exchange, Wata received a briefcase, the familiar weight of a bribe. The camera zoomed in as Wata opened the case for a brief moment, revealing stacks of money. Dirty, foreign currency, tainted by betrayal. His eyes flicked from the bribe to the papers, then back to the men. His smile was thin, calculated. In that moment, Ibrahim felt the sharp sting of betrayal slice through him, deeper than any wound he'd ever received on the battlefield. Wata wasn't just handing over information. He was selling out the very soul of the nation Ibrahim had fought so hard to protect. Back in his office, Ibrahim stood motionless in front of the screen, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The anger that surged through him was primal, raw, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room was burning with the intensity of his rage. He had fought for his country's independence, had shed blood, sweat, and tears to break free from the chains of foreign influence. To see Wata, a man he had once trusted with his life, turn against him, against his people, felt like the ultimate betrayal. But Ibrahim was no stranger to betrayal. He knew how to channel anger into action, how to transform fury into strategy. The path forward was clear. Wata had to be exposed, and the foreign agents behind him had to be neutralized. He exhaled slowly, forcing the rage to subside, and allowed his mind to shift gears. There was no room for emotion now. The operation was too important. Every second counted. Ibrahim turned to Zongo, who had been standing quietly by his side, awaiting orders. "It's time," Ibrahim said, his voice calm but edged with a quiet, fierce determination. "We strike, but we strike carefully. We will use Wata to expose them all." Zongo nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. The hunt was far from over, but now it was about to become a game of counterintelligence. The traitor would lead them to the rest of the enemy, and the price for betrayal would be paid in full. The tension in the room was palpable as Ibrahim gave the order. "It's time," he told Zongo, his voice cold, resolute. The moment of reckoning had arrived. For weeks, they had watched, gathered evidence, and carefully set the stage for this confrontation. Now, it was no longer a matter of suspicion. It was about exposing the truth, about catching the traitor red-handed. The operation was meticulous, designed with precision. Every detail had been planned, every move accounted for. A false meeting had been arranged at the top floor of the Ministry of Defense, a location well known for its security, yet discreet enough to hide the true nature of the gathering. Ibrahim knew Wata's ego, his belief that he could navigate the situation unscathed. He had no reason to suspect that today would be different. As expected, Wata arrived promptly, his usual confident swagger evident in his gait. He greeted the officers at the door with his characteristic smile, the same smile Ibrahim had trusted for years, the smile of a man who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him through the darkest hours of the revolution. Wata's eyes twinkled with the same self-assurance he'd always had, completely unaware that everything was set to change. He was walking right into the trap. Inside the room, Ibrahim stood by the large wooden table, flanked by 10 armed soldiers, their presence silent but overwhelming. Each man stood at attention, their eyes fixed on the door, prepared for any sudden moves. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air as Wata stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Ibrahim's gaze locked onto Wata's, and for a fleeting second, the air seemed to crackle with the unspoken history between them. Wata's smile faltered for just a split second, but only Ibrahim noticed. The subtle shift in Wata's demeanor, the brief hesitation before he advanced, told Ibrahim that something was off. Perhaps Wata had started to feel the weight of his own betrayal creeping into his conscience. Perhaps he could sense that something was not quite right, but it was too late. As Wata took a few steps into the room, Ibrahim spoke. "You were my brother," he said, his voice thunderous, the words ringing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. His eyes never left Wata's. "Why?" Wata paused, his body stiffening. The room fell into a heavy silence. It was the silence before the storm, the kind of quiet that made every breath feel like it was being held hostage. Wata's usual bravado crumbled in the face of the accusation. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, he only met Ibrahim's gaze, his lips twitching in an uncomfortable silence. There was nothing left to say. He knew he was caught. Ibrahim, however, wasn't interested in words. The evidence would speak for itself. Zongo stepped forward, carrying a black suitcase. The case was simple, unassuming, but its contents were anything but. Ibrahim's eyes flicked to the suitcase as Zongo placed it on the table with a soft thud. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, amplifying the moment. Wada's gaze shifted to the case, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to anticipate the contents. But he couldn't. Zongo opened the case slowly, deliberately. The first thing they saw were bundles of foreign currency, bribe money from the agents Wada had been working with. Wada's face grew pale as the weight of his actions settled in. This was the price of betrayal, the money that had bought his loyalty, the price of his nation's secrets. Zongo pulled out the second item, a small tracking device. It was a sophisticated piece of technology, one that would have allowed foreign operatives to track every move Ibrahim made, every decision he took. Wada had facilitated this, had sold the president's every movement to foreign hands in exchange for power and wealth. The final item was the most damning, a USB drive containing a treasure trove of classified files, maps, communications, military strategies, all things that should have been protected by the highest level of secrecy, now handed over to the enemy. As Zongo displayed the drive, Wada's knees seemed to weaken, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of his own guilt was finally taking its toll. Ibrahim stepped forward, his expression hard as stone. "These are the things you've given them, Colonel," he said, his voice low but full of a righteous fury that sent a chill through the room. "And for what? Money? Power?" He shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Wada, still silent, lowered his gaze to the floor, unable to meet Ibrahim's eyes. The truth hung in the air like an inescapable storm. The betrayal wasn't just about the money or the secrets. It was about the destruction of everything Ibrahim had fought for, everything Wada had once sworn to protect. Ibrahim took a deep breath, his hand tightening around the edge of the table. It was done. There was no turning back now. But as much as his heart burned with rage, he knew the next move would require even more precision. Wada's role in this plot could not go unpunished, but it could still serve a purpose. Ibrahim's mind shifted, formulating a new plan, a new strategy. "We will stop them," Ibrahim declared, his voice steady once more. The trap had been set, and now the game was in his hands. The air in the room had shifted. The confrontation was no longer just about exposing a traitor. It was about turning the tables, about using the very betrayal against those who had thought they could manipulate Burkina Faso from the shadows. Ibrahim's mind, usually calm and calculated, was racing with possibilities. His anger was still there, burning deep within, but it was tempered now with a cold, calculating focus. He had been betrayed, but that betrayal would be the very thing that would lead to their defeat. Rather than having Wada imprisoned immediately, Ibrahim saw something much more powerful. He recognized that Wada's knowledge, as painful as it was, could be turned to their advantage. Wada had been the key player in this foreign plot, and now he could serve as the key to bringing it down. Ibrahim's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "You'll help us stop them," he commanded, his gaze never leaving Wada's. The words weren't a request. They were an order, backed by the weight of authority. Ibrahim wasn't asking for help. He was demanding it. Wada, his eyes hollow with defeat, seemed to weigh his options. Betrayal was a heavy burden, but it was nothing compared to the prospect of facing the wrath of Ibrahim. He swallowed hard, his breath shaky, before speaking in a low, reluctant voice. "What do you want to know?" Ibrahim's expression was a mixture of resolve and grim determination. "I want the names, the identities of everyone involved. I want to know their plans, who's pulling the strings, You'll tell us everything." For a long moment, Wata hesitated, his mind seemingly torn between his former loyalty to Ibrahim and the reality of his actions. But in the end, the weight of his own treachery crushed his resolve. Slowly, he began to speak. The names flowed from Wata's lips, each one heavier than the last. He revealed the identities of the foreign agents he had been working with, diplomats disguised as aid workers, businessmen posing as consultants, and spies masked as agricultural experts. The scale of the operation was much larger than Ibrahim had anticipated, and the realization hit him hard. These weren't just local conspirators. This was a network stretching across borders, supported by foreign governments that refused to let go of their influence over Burkina Faso. But Ibrahim wasn't deterred. He was already thinking 2 steps ahead. The intelligence was a treasure trove, one that could be used to not only dismantle the current threat, but also cripple the foreign influence that had been so pervasive for so long. His next move would be swift, calculated, and ruthless. "I want you to feed them false information," Ibrahim ordered, his voice sharp with authority. "Every detail you pass along must be a lie. We'll make them believe they're winning, right up until the moment they're caught in their own web." Zongo, standing quietly by Ibrahim's side, nodded in agreement. They had already started planting the seeds of misinformation. Wata's role would be pivotal in feeding the enemy false intelligence, drawing them into a series of carefully laid traps. Under duress, Wata complied, offering up even more details about the agents' movements, their planned sabotage, and their covert operations. Ibrahim's team meticulously crafted a new narrative, one that would send the foreign operatives in the wrong direction, make them trust false intel, and expose their own vulnerabilities. The first step in their plan was to plant false intelligence about a high-profile government meeting that didn't exist. The foreign agents, eager to gain insight into the president's decisions, took the bait. They made their move, only to find themselves being watched, tracked, and exposed. As they made their way to the supposed meeting location, Ibrahim's men were already in position, waiting to capture them. The fallout was swift and brutal. Embassy officials, who had been working covertly to destabilize the country, vanished overnight, their identities erased, their operations crumbled. The false leads they had been chasing had led them directly into the hands of Ibrahim's team. Foreign agents, once hidden in plain sight, were now exposed for all to see. They were arrested, their secrets unraveling with every interrogated word. One by one, the operatives who had been embedded within Burkina Faso's borders were taken down. The network was exposed, its strings cut by the very hands that had been betrayed. Ibrahim's strategy had turned the tables in a way that no one could have anticipated. What was meant to be a covert foreign plot to destabilize Burkina Faso had become the very thing that unified the country and revealed the true enemy. As the pieces of the plot fell into place, Ibrahim watched with a grim satisfaction. He had not only stopped a foreign intervention, but had transformed Burkina Faso from a target into a formidable adversary. The country was no longer just fighting for its independence, it was fighting for its very sovereignty on the global stage. And under Ibrahim's leadership, it had come out victorious. The chessboard had been set, and the foreign powers had underestimated the resilience of a nation led by a man who knew the stakes. What had begun as a betrayal now marked the turning point for a country that would no longer bow to foreign influence. Ibrahim's plan had been flawless, and as the dust settled, the message was clear. Burkina Faso had been tested, and it had emerged unbroken. The tension was palpable. The foreign operatives, unaware that they had already been exposed, moved with practiced ease. One of the most insidious players in the operation was an agricultural advisor, posing as a consultant to the government. He had been orchestrating the destabilization efforts from behind the scenes, feeding false intelligence and manipulating resources to create a sense of crisis. His request for a secret meeting with Colonel Wata had been the final piece in the puzzle, a piece Ibrahim was ready to capture and destroy. Ibrahim, ever the strategist, had approved the plan. The trap was set, and there was no turning back now. Wata, now a reluctant ally in Ibrahim's counter-espionage effort, had agreed to wear a hidden microphone. He had become a pawn in the game he had once been a part of, but this was his chance to atone for his betrayal, if such a thing was even possible. The meeting was to take place at a remote safe house located deep in the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The house was inconspicuous, nestled between the towering trees that marked the edge of the city. Ibrahim's team, however, had been watching it for days. The safe house, like many of the operatives involved, had been a well-kept secret, until now. The agents inside were unaware of the fact that every word spoken within those walls was being captured by Ibrahim's men, who had set up listening devices and hidden surveillance cameras. As the appointed time drew near, the air around the safe house grew heavy. Ibrahim, Zongo, and the rest of the team waited in tense anticipation. The night was quiet, but the silence felt as if it were waiting to snap. Wada arrived at the safe house, looking every bit the man he once was, confident, composed, but with the subtle unease of someone who knew they were walking into the unknown. His every move was being watched, but he had no idea just how tightly the noose was closing around him. Inside the safe house, Wada met with the foreign agents. Their faces, cold and calculating, showed no sign of panic or fear. They spoke in hushed tones, their words a mix of frustration and determination, as they discussed the plans to destabilize the government, dismantle the progress Ibrahim had made, and reassert foreign control over Burkina Faso's resources. Wata handed over new documents, files filled with intelligence and confidential details about military operations. The agents took the documents, nodding in approval, unaware that the room was being watched from every angle. Every word, every gesture was being recorded, and as Ibrahim sat in the darkened room, watching the scene unfold on the monitors, he knew that the final chapter of this dark tale was about to be written. The signal was given. Ibrahim's soldiers, led by Captain Zongo, stormed the safe house in a coordinated blitz. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoed through the building as Zongo's men breached the door, sweeping in with swift precision. The operatives inside barely had time to react. Before they could make a move, they were apprehended, their arms twisted behind their backs, their faces showing the shock and disbelief of men who thought they were untouchable. The agents, so sure of their safety and hidden agendas, were now bound and helpless. Ibrahim's soldiers, moving like shadows, seized the incriminating documents and evidence that had been passed between Wata and the foreign agents. Everything, every plan, every communication, was now in their hands. Ibrahim entered the room last, his calm presence cutting through the chaos. He walked slowly, his steps deliberate, as if he were stepping into a space he had long known he would occupy. The agents, their hands cuffed behind their backs, looked up at him with a mixture of defiance and disbelief. One of them sneered, as if still trying to assert dominance in the face of defeat. "You think you've won?" The agent spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Ibrahim paused, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the man who had been a part of the conspiracy to undermine his nation. His voice was quiet, but there was an undeniable power in it, a strength that came not from victory, but from the unwavering conviction of his mission. "This is not my victory," Ibrahim said, his words echoing in the room. "It is Burkina Faso's." In that moment, the truth of his statement was undeniable. Ibrahim's victory wasn't just about catching these agents, these betrayers of his country. It was about the triumph of the people of Burkina Faso, who had stood beside him against the forces of foreign control. The agents, defeated and exposed, had underestimated the resilience of the nation they had hoped to manipulate. Ibrahim looked at the agents one last time, his expression unreadable. Burkina Faso will not bow to foreign masters. Not now, not ever, he declared, his words a resounding affirmation of the strength and unity of his people. As the agents were led away in cuffs, their heads hung low, Ibrahim felt a wave of quiet satisfaction. The battle was won, but the war, for the future of Burkina Faso, was far from over. This was only the beginning. The morning after the capture, Burkina Faso awoke to a wave of shocking headlines. The nation's newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television networks were ablaze with news of the espionage plot that had been uncovered and dismantled. Words like betrayal, infiltration, and foreign interference were splashed across the front pages. But at the center of it all was a single, unwavering message. The nation had been betrayed. But now, it was free. The people of Burkina Faso were stunned, but as the full extent of the plot sank in, a sense of solidarity began to take root. Ibrahim Traoré had not only protected the country from a foreign conspiracy, but had exposed the shadowy forces that had sought to undermine its sovereignty. In every corner of the nation, from the bustling streets of Ouagadougou to the quiet villages that dotted the landscape, people gathered to talk, to celebrate, and to reflect. They had stood at the brink, but now they stood stronger than ever before. Ibrahim knew this was a defining moment for the nation, and for himself. He had never sought power for personal gain. His mission had always been one of liberation, of ensuring that Burkina Faso's future was shaped by its own people, not foreign powers. And now, more than ever, his leadership would be tested. But he was ready. He had never doubted the strength of his people, nor their resolve to remain independent. The stage was set for his televised address. As the camera lights came on, Ibrahim stood before the people, not in the ceremonial robes of a president, but in the simple attire of a leader who walked among them. His face, usually stern, was now calm and resolute. His voice carried the weight of a man who had borne the burden of leadership for the good of his country, and in that moment, it carried the resolve of a protector. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, Ibrahim declared, his words cutting through the air with quiet power. The tone was not one of victory, but of duty fulfilled, of a promise kept. I will never kneel to foreign masters, never again. As his words echoed across the nation, a wave of emotion swept through the crowd gathered before their screens. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration of independence, a reaffirmation of the nation's sovereignty, and a commitment to the principles that had guided Ibrahim from the moment he had taken up arms for his country. The response was immediate. In every town, village, and city, people gathered in celebration. In the marketplaces, people cheered, shaking hands with strangers, united by the pride they felt for their country. In remote villages, people watched the broadcast on small television screens, their faces alight with a new sense of hope. They weren't just hearing words, they were feeling them, deep in their bones. In the streets of Ouagadougou, people took to their feet, clapping and singing, their voices rising in a chorus of joy. They were no longer just citizens, they were part of something bigger. Ibrahim had not only led them through a crisis, he had led them to a new understanding of their own power. He had shown them that no matter how strong the external forces, the spirit of Burkina Faso was stronger. For Ibrahim, standing there in front of the camera, it was a moment of quiet reflection. He had known the burden of leadership all too well, but this was different. This was a moment when he wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol, a living testament to resilience, to the unyielding spirit of the people he had sworn to protect. He had brought them through the storm, and now, together, they could begin to rebuild. The days that followed were filled with a sense of unity and renewed purpose. The people of Burkina Faso stood together, committed to their nation's sovereignty and determined to build a future free from foreign influence. Ibrahim had shown them that no enemy was too powerful, no betrayal too deep to overcome. The real strength lay in the people. Ibrahim Traoré had not only survived a plot that threatened to tear his country apart, he had emerged as a symbol of hope, a beacon of what could be accomplished when a nation stood united. His leadership was no longer defined by titles or positions of power. It was defined by the hearts and minds of the people who believed in him and in the promise of a free and independent Burkina Faso. As the months passed, the memory of the betrayal faded, but the sense of pride and unity remained. Ibrahim's name was spoken with reverence and gratitude, not just as a leader, but as the protector of a nation that had fought and won its freedom. His legacy was no longer just one of military success. It was one of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a leader and his people. As the dust settled, Ibrahim and Zongo shared a quiet moment under the stars. "They will try again," Zongo warned. "And we will stop them," Ibrahim replied, determination etched in his voice. The battle was far from over, but for now the lion rested, knowing his people were safe. Ibrahim Traoré had turned betrayal into strength, showing the world that Burkina Faso was unyielding, a nation that could not be tamed.